Hello, my name is Destiny, and welcome to my channel, Destined by Design for You. Have you ever felt like the ugly duckling or the oddball out? Has it ever felt like you're just the one who does not fit in? You're that cog that just doesn't mesh with the rest. I think most of us, at least at some point in our lives, have felt like that. And I want to tell a little bit of my story to tell you how that theme has kind of followed me throughout my entire story. And one of the first instances of that in my life started when I was about 3 or 4. It was 1994, and I had been entered into a Little Miss Cutie Pie contest. There I was in my poofy dress with sequins and ruffles, and my hair looked like I had had a perm because I have very fluffy natural curls. And I looked like a little poodle on parade. But I was entered into this contest at the whim of a family friend, and I was adorable. I was this teeny tiny little thing that just stuck out like a sore thumb. When I was supposed to be going left in the dance routine, I went right. When I was supposed to be going right in the dance routine, I went left. And the crowd ate it up. When it came time for us to do our little interviews, I can't tell you the question they asked me, but I know that I rambled on and on about my millions of pets and how much I love them. And then as I was leaving stage, I was supposed to twirl on the left hand, the right hand, and exit. Well, I twirled on one end, went back behind stage, realized I forgot my other twirl, ran back out on stage, and finished my last twirl. The crowd giggled and laughed. I was adorable. And lo and behold, when the competition came to an end, I was first runner-up. And as you can imagine, all the family friends and many of the audience members were talking about how she should have been first. She was the cutest. But I was first runner-up. And that kind of seemed to be the story of my life from then on. I didn't recognize it then, but I always seemed to be first runner-up, or the one that was cute and quirky and lovable, but I never quite won the prize. I was never the one picked first. But if I'm being honest, I've never really fit in. I have never really been normal. And that was evident from the very beginning of my story. Now, as I go into my story, I want you to remember something. Many of these things happened about 35 years ago. These things are in the past. The people that I talk about are either healed or healing. And we may have experienced these situations differently. We may have come out of them differently, but they are all part of our story. And they have shaped who we are. And God, at least in my case, has been working these things for my good. Now, when I was born, I was an unexpected surprise. My mom was 15. And like I said, don't go throwing stones. You weren't there and you don't know the situation. And at 15, she was terrified. And she hid her pregnancy, not knowing what she was going to do. When my grandparents discovered that she was pregnant, they were just as perplexed. They were probably my age, if not just a little older, and they were pastors. And a baby at 15 was never what they had planned for my mom. And they did not know what the consequences would be for her or for them. And after learning that my mother was pregnant, they learned that unbeknownst to her, she had got the mumps shot while she was pregnant. And doctors warned that I could be born deformed, disabled, or dead. And so my grandparents, not knowing what kind of future I would have or how I would affect the future of my mom, they began praying me away, not knowing what else to do. But my mom, at 15, said she was praying to keep me, praying that I would be born safe and healthy. And 6 weeks early, I was born. I needed to be in an incubator, and I was tiny as could be, but I was otherwise healthy. And to this day, my grandparents say they thank God for unanswered prayers. So in spite of the rough beginning, I was blessed to be born into a family that loved me and has always loved me. And I grew up living with my grandparents and my mom for a long time. My mom and I didn't move out of my grandparents' house until I was about 5, which put my mom about 20. And again, it may have been unexpected and unplanned, but I was welcomed into my family, and I have been loved from the very moment I was born. But as I grew, we soon learned that there were other things that had happened because of my early birth and possibly as a result of the shot. I began walking on my toes, and it was discovered that I had a tight Achilles tendon, which required several procedures in order to correct it. And again, that was a blessing. The tight Achilles tendon was nothing compared to what I could have had as a result of, 1, being so premature, and 2, my mom having that shot when she didn't know she was pregnant with me. And so that was the beginning of my story. When I was old enough to start school, I made friends in school and had a few neighborhood friends. But I faced bullies because I walked on my toes and because I often had casts. The elementary boys would call me slowpoke and glare at me. In 2nd grade, a girl 3 times my size told me that I couldn't play with my best friend anymore. And I struggled to read until 3rd grade. And when I say struggled, I meant struggled. So much so that previously I'd had to repeat part of 1st grade. And in 5th grade, lo and behold, I made friends with the wrong person. She was the least popular girl in school. And because I was her friend, I was also one of the least popular girls in school. And so the popular crowd told the rest of the crowd that they couldn't talk to me. I remember to this day, one girl, she goes, "You're really sweet. I wish we could be friends, but I don't want so-and-so to be mad at me." And so in school, I made friends, but I only ever really had 1 or 2. And I was always in the lower crowd. I was always in the oddball out. But this didn't make me cry. This didn't make me moan and groan. Though when the one friend told me that I couldn't be friends with my best friend anymore, I got a little dramatic and weepy. But otherwise, I was determined to not let this bother me. I was going to be the hero. I was going to be the one who stood against the crowd. I was such a goofball that I prayed for glasses because I thought that if I had glasses, then I could stand up for those kids in all the 90s movies and 80s movies who got picked on for having glasses. God answered that prayer. Really wish I hadn't made that one, and I'm praying for him to go back to where I don't need glasses, but that'll come. But like I said, I've always been the oddball out. I didn't fit in. I had very few friends, and for some odd reason, I was always getting picked on or laughed out. When I got into middle school, that didn't really change. When I got to meet the teacher, all the girls surrounded me, and I suddenly felt like I was surrounded by sharks. They were smiling, they seemed welcoming, but it terrified me. And after all the stuff I'd went through in elementary school, I had just decided that it wasn't worth it. I was not wanting to put myself out there to make friends again just for things to go wrong. So my first week of 6th grade, I was determined that I was just going to be a loner. I was not going to have any friends, and it would be fine. Well, it didn't make it very far. I was quickly adopted by my 2 very best friends, who I am still friends with to this day. But, as you guess it, we were the oddballs out. The popular girls either didn't like us or thought we were better than them. And so we had a complicated relationship with the girls in our class. And the boys in our class who had been picking on my two best friends for Lord knows how long, suddenly put a target on my back. And so they were constantly giving us a hard time. And me and my two friends, we all handled that differently. We came through that differently. But for most of middle school, we were known as the Turtle Girls because we stood out because we had a very passionate appreciation for the Ninja Turtles. And so while we bonded over those things and we were good friends throughout middle school, we just didn't quite fit in with the rest of our class. And our school was small. So there were no other 6th grade classes to find other friends in. We were in the same class with the same kids throughout 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And it was a trial, you know, it was a struggle. But again, while it was rough, it wasn't fun, and it definitely had its impact, we came through okay. You know, for the most part, we didn't deal with violence. My friends who had been there longer, they dealt with some harsher stuff than I did, but they had been there longer and they had to deal with certain people much longer. But, you know, in spite of the fact that we just didn't fit in and most people didn't want anything to do with us, we came through. And our friendship, for the most part, was stronger. By high school, a lot of that had faded away. I got along with most of the people in my class. People who had been stirring up the trouble and causing all the cliques and the mess, they had either matured or they had left. So high school was the calm and peaceful, and I loved being at school. Didn't love school, but I loved being at school. It's also where, by about 6th grade, I had come out of my struggle with learning, and by high school, I was an AB student, and I was doing well. So high school was that breath of fresh air for me. But while things in school had improved, things at home had started to become rough. And most people didn't know what was going on. My mom and my stepdad were in a very unhappy marriage. And I won't go into all the details in this video. But when they were getting along, I got the brunt of the frustration. When they weren't getting along, everything was good and my praises were being sung. It was a constant battle based on what the mood was in my family. A lot of it stemming from my stepdad. My mom played her part in their relationship, but most of what I dealt with was the frustration of my stepdad. And as I got older, in his mind, I was lazy and spoiled, which may have had some truth. My mom was young, you know, she was very lax with me. But in his mind, I could never do anything right. I should jump when he said jump. I should do when he said do. And as I got older and I started doing chores, he swore that I just did everything terribly despite him, or that I was constantly going to my mom to get permission for things and going against him. And I could never do anything right. And I remember in high school just being so frustrated because I'd walk in the door and all of a sudden I'd be barked orders at, you need to go do this, you need to go do that. And again, when I got it done, well, just let me do it. Or I can see you don't, you know, it was always an attitude. And that frustrated me. I was angry with him, but I was also angry with why in the world is this a problem? Why does he think that I'm out to do this against him? Again, I'm a kid. I'm still, you know, learning how to do things. So I'm sure I did make mistakes, and I was a teenager. So yeah, I'm sure I gave some attitude at times, but I usually did what I was asked to do, maybe not as fast as I was told to do it. So I didn't understand why I was getting constant grief. And like I said, a lot of the times it would be the moment I walked in the door. I hadn't even got to take a breath before I was being barked at to do this. And anytime there was a conflict between them, I was pulled in the middle, or, you know, I had to deal with it. It was just stressful, like so much so to the point that I wanted to put a tent out back of our school and just live there. And again, I love my mom and my mom loved me. And, you know, had he ever laid a hand on me, that would have ended the marriage immediately. So I was never physically harmed, but it was just this constant emotional tension. And things got pretty bad at certain times. I'm only telling the lighter stuff. But it was just constant. I never knew what his mood was going to be, if they were going to be getting along, what I was going to walk into. And it was just like walking on eggshells all the time. And it could have been bazillion times worse. I'm fully aware of that. God's hand was over me. But it was also at that time just that constant struggle. And like I said, I faced that at school growing up. So to have that same garbage going on at home, it was just frustrating. And I just wanted to get away. And I remember at one point, I just decided, you know what? I'm going to do everything as perfectly as I can do it. I'm going to jump when he says jump. I'm going to hop right to whatever he asked me to do. And I'm going to see. And guess what? Even when I did everything to the best of my knowledge and ability, it still wasn't right. And that's when I learned and accepted the fact that the problem wasn't me. It was his problem. It didn't matter how well I did what I was going to do. I was getting the brunt of all his frustration, not because it was my fault, but because I was the one that it was easiest to put it on. And by the time I graduated high school, that marriage had ended. From there, let's go into college. College was one of the best times of my life. I was doing well in school. I was out of the house. I was living with my grandparents while I went to college. I was commuting to college. It was just a new world, a new life, and it was awesome. But I had felt led to be a teacher. And anyone who knew me in high school knew that I was still very much coming out of my shell. I didn't like talking in front of people. I could do it, but I didn't like it. And I still got nervous. And the idea of being a teacher just was a challenge. I felt like it was where God was leading me, but I also didn't feel up to the task. I didn't know how I was going to do this. And so while college was great and learning how to be a teacher was great and interning in classrooms was fun, the real struggle began when I began teaching. My internship was a trial by fire, but my first 3 years nearly killed me. I got a job after much waiting, after several interviews with no fruit. I finally got a job in a kindergarten classroom. And as a first-year teacher, I could create lesson plans, I could decorate a room, I could plan the centers, I could do all the fun stuff. But keeping organized and on top of all the paperwork and all the requirements, and then managing student behavior were never my strong suit. And this was another one of those defining moments in my life. We had these people who would come in and serve as kind of like advisors. And so she would come in on her regular schedule and she would tell me what I was doing well and what I was not doing well and things I needed to improve on. And we'd come up with plans on how to help me improve as a teacher because I was struggling. Managing student behavior ate up most of my time. And if you're managing behavior, how much teaching is really getting done? And so it was a struggle, and I didn't know if I was going to survive my first year. I was terrified that I was going to get fired. And my advisor was there one day, and she goes, "I've never seen someone work so hard." But it wasn't fully a compliment. The underlying text, what she didn't say was, "I've never seen someone work so hard but not make improvement." And again, she was there to encourage and help, but she was just as frustrated as I was. I had all of these skills. I could do all of these things very well, but they were not seeing the improvement that they needed to see. And the same was for my boss, who, while she liked me, she was very stern with me and said she had to see improvement. But I didn't know what else to do. I was working my tail off, doing everything in my power, and barely keeping my head above water. And I had great teammates. It was just managing student behavior and juggling all the responsibilities of being a teacher was a lot. And I was barely making it. Year 2 was slightly better. Year 3, I finally felt like I had stepped into what I needed to be, and I was finally making progress. But then I got moved to 1st grade. And at that time, I had started working towards my master's degree because I had told myself after 3 years of teaching that I wanted to get my master's degree. And so I was working on my master's degree. I had been moved into 1st grade, a whole new grade level. And I reached my breaking point. Year 4 and year 5 were my burnout years. I didn't know it at the time, but I was burnt out and I had fallen into a depression. And how I did not end up getting fired those 2 years, only God knows. Because all the progress that I had made, everything that I had learned, had felt like it had been ripped out of my hands. And I felt like I was struggling as bad, if not worse, than I did when I was a 1st-year teacher. And I was so ready to give up. And I really thought that was going to be the end of my career. And I was like, God, if you don't want me in teaching anymore, then you need to take me out. And it was just to that point. Year 4 was the roughest. And year 5, God had pulled me out of my depression and was helping me to heal, but it was still a struggle. And I just didn't know what I was going to do. And then I got displaced, which is where you are being moved to a different school. Displacement can happen for a lot of different reasons. And it was a blessing in disguise, as much as it felt like rejection and as much as I felt so broken. This new school welcomed me with open arms. And while I still struggled, I didn't struggle like I'd struggled those 2 years of burnout. I had come out of the burnout. God had delivered me from the depression. I finished my degree and I started being able to survive. And I got a little bit above the survival stage. I was doing okay. I was doing well. I was making progress. But it still was a constant battle. Teaching never came naturally. And I was wondering, God, if you've called me here, why is it such a constant battle? And I made great friends. I met some wonderful kids and developed some strong relationships. But it was still never quite right. I had all these creative ideas. I had, all these things I wanted to do. I was well liked. I could talk to the parents, but behavior was still a constant struggle for me. And the workload just kept growing and growing, and I felt myself entering another burnout. But I had learned through all this how to persevere. I knew how to be knocked down and get back up. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fun. But I had learned resilience through this process. And I still believed that I could become a better teacher. I was becoming a good teacher, but I didn't know if I'd ever become a great teacher. Because again, it never felt natural. And about year 10, maybe year 11, I started to wonder if this really is what I would be doing for forever. And I did feel like the Lord was going to be leading me in a different direction. But I didn't know what direction yet. I just knew that God may be moving me out of teaching, or maybe moving me into a different school or into a different type of teaching. I didn't know. But I had this feeling that, God was going to start transitioning. And then I would say by year 11, I was sure that God was calling me out of teaching, but he hadn't told me into what yet. And so I was just waiting on the Lord. I'm like, okay, in the Lord's time, he'll show me where to go. I'm going to try not to get ahead of him. But, I felt that leading that he was moving me out of that area, moving me out of that school at the very least, but probably out of teaching entirely. But I didn't know where we were going next. And I wasn't going to leave that year and not know what I was doing. And so when the time came to decide that I would be entering year 12, I was like, okay, God's not giving me any clear next steps. The door's been open for me to change grade levels. So let's do this. All along knowing that I would probably be in my last year or so. But again, I wasn't planning to go anywhere until God had told me it was time. And that year was a battle. And I probably wasn't till October that I was finally getting my head above water, finally, getting into things. But I'm like, okay, God, I believe that I was supposed to start this year, but why is this such a struggle? And, I was trying to get back on my feet, trying to get back on track with the year. And we had just had a hurricane and we were finally heading back into school. And I think it was the second day after the hurricane, the first day with kids or something like that. I was driving into school and I got to a stoplight and I was listening to something and it was just very dismissive of, what they were saying. I was just kind of in a bad mood. When I heard, "You're going to tell your boss you're leaving in December." And I went, "What? No. And it was followed up within that moment with, "You're either going to tell him or you're going to have to give him short notice or you're not going to have a choice." And I was not sure what to do with that. And you can hear that full story in another video. But from that moment on, I began to wrestle with the Lord. And after much wrestling, it became clear that I would not be finishing out the year. And so I left. And I'll be honest, I'm still in that place of waiting. God opened the door for me to leave. He made the way. He provided. And I've been not teaching and without a job for a year and a few months now. And like I said, I've always felt like the oddball out. People like me. People see good qualities in me. But I never quite measure up or I never quite fit in. I'm always lacking in something. And here I am, 35, without a job, and I don't know where God's leading me. Now, last year, it was a constant battle. I'm like, God, when are you going to open that door? When are you going to fulfill your promises? When are you going to show me what's next? And now, while I'm still impatient, I'm still like, okay, God, what else should I be doing? It's not that constant battle. It's not that constant panic. I'm waiting as peacefully as I know how. But from the beginning of my story to where I am right now, I have never felt like I quite fit in. I'm always the first runner up. And it is a struggle because I know that God has a purpose and plan for my life. I know that He has called me where He has called me to. I know that He has redeemed everything that I have ever been through. And I can see His fingerprints all over my life, even in the things that were hard. I may not understand them, but I see His hand of protection over me from the very beginning, even when I went through some of the hardest things I've ever faced. But again, I haven't felt like I've arrived at where I'm supposed to be. And one of the songs that God has used over and over and over in my life is a song by the band BarlowGirl. It was popular when I was in high school. And I won't lie, I still have their CDs on my phone to this day. But the one that I've kind of picked up as the anthem for my life is called One More Round. And I'm just going to read the lyrics, because if I sang it, I would scream it. But I'm just going to read the lyrics. It says, round 1 wasn't what I thought it'd be. Round 2, I'm struggling to breathe. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, I wonder why I stepped inside this ring. I may be knocked down and so bruised, but I'm here to tell you that I may be knocked down, but not for the count. So take me one more round. I'll just keep fighting. One more round. You're messing me up, but I'm still here. One more round. I'll come out swinging. One more round. I'm telling you now, I'm not going to lose it here. It's so hard to get up off the floor again, but I know that victory is when I'm pushing through the pain that tries to feed me lies that I won't reach the end. I may be knocked down, bloodied, and so bruised, but I'm here to tell you I may be knocked down, but not for the count. So take me one more round. I'll just keep fighting. One more round. You're messing me up, but I'm still here. One more round. I'll come out swinging. One more round. I'm telling you now, I'm not going to lose it. I am not defeated, though you cannot see it. I have never won a battle on my own. I find strength in weakness. I find hope in believing God is for me. Who can bring me down? So take me one more round. I'll just keep fighting. One more round. You're messing me up, but oh, I'm still here. One more round. I'll come out swinging. One more round. I'm telling you now, I'm not going to lose it here. My testimony may sound very light to some. There are many of you who have been through deeper and darker things than I could even imagine. And to others, my testimony may sound ridiculous. Like if I had just got with the program, none of this would have been a problem. And to others, it sounds hard. To others, you can't imagine going through any of that and getting back up. We're all at different places. All of our stories are different. But I find this one thing to be true, no matter what our testimonies are. If we depend on the Lord, He is the one who fights for us. And even in times when we weren't depending on Him, we can look back and see He was the one fighting our battles. Because I am not defeated. Though you cannot see it, I have never won a battle on my own. I find strength in weakness. I find hope in believing God is for me. Who can bring me down? So no matter what struggles you've been through, no matter how it feels like you may never reach the goal, or how it feels like life is a constant struggle, our hope is in God. We find strength in weakness. We find hope in believing that God is for us and He can give us the victory. I don't know where you are in your story. I don't know how many times life has knocked you down. I don't know what your victories are, and I don't know what your failures are. But I can tell you one thing. You have never faced any of those without God by your side, whether you knew it or not. And His hand has been on you through everything that you have faced. No, that didn't change the choices others made, and it may have not changed the choices that you've made. But if God is for you, who can bring you down? If you are depending on Him, if you are turning to Him, He is the one who fights for you. If we're fighting against Him, we will always lose. But if we are depending on Him and walking in His will according to the best of our knowledge and ability, He is the one fighting for us. I wish I could give you the highlight reel. It's so much easier to tell about the victories. It's so much easier to tell about the times that I was able to get that punch in and I was able to win and get victory. But it's important that we talk about the struggles, because more times than not, the struggles are the larger part of the story. And the struggles and the failures are the part that shape us and mold us. I don't understand why I was born to a young mom, that I was born so early, and that I had the minor health issues that I had. I don't know why I never could seem to fit into school. I don't know why teaching was such a struggle. I don't understand why that is my story. Yes, again, there are the highlights. There are the good things that I haven't mentioned yet. But those are the things that shaped me. Those are the things that have given me the resilience and the empathy that I have. They're the reason that I have a heart for the outcast. But as easy as it would be to tell you the highlight reel and to tell you all the times that God gave me the victory, it is the hard parts. It is the struggles. It is the times that I have been knocked down and felt like my ribs were broken. Those are the moments that shaped me, because those are the moments that God picked me up, that He helped me get back up and keep fighting. I could have given up at any time, but I didn't. There are beautiful stories that come out of the victories, that come out of the wins. But it is our character, our testimony, and our capacity that are stretched and formed in the struggle. Don't be afraid to share the struggles, the ugly parts. Don't be afraid to look back at them and see how God brought you through. They may have been painful. They may have not made sense, but they are a part of your story. But I want to bring up something else. I may have struggled. I may have dealt with bullies. I may have dealt with manipulation and emotional abuse. I may have dealt with struggling in work and not knowing if I'd ever be good enough. But I'm not a failure, and I'm not a victim. These things are part of my story, and they have helped, in some ways better, some ways worse, shape who I am. And obviously, how I reacted to them and how I let God heal me, or how I held back from God healing me, those impacted how these things affected my life. But they don't define me. I'm not my struggles. I'm not my failures. They may have helped shape and form me, and they may be evidence of God's faithfulness even in the hardest times of my life, but they're not who I am. There is value in the struggles. There is growth that comes from the struggles. Many times a great harvest comes from what was lost, or what was pruned, or what was cut away. Those hard parts in our lives, whether they were the will of God or the choice of ourselves or others, they are part of what have shaped us and molded us into who we are. Those mistakes that we learned from, the people that we are not anymore, the people that we no longer let in our lives, are all part of what has shaped our story and our testimony, but they are not who we are. It is because of our weaknesses, our struggles, and our troubles that we gain resilience, and that we can get back up when life knocks us down. It is because of the hard times that our faith can grow, and that we learn of God's goodness and His faithfulness. When I look back on my struggles, I see where my wrestle with inadequacy comes from. And that is still a constant battle. It is one of the wounds that I have to wrestle with, that I am waiting on the Lord and working with the Lord to see healed. But I can also see where the foundation of hope that God has built in me comes from. Where that foundation of faith, even when I don't feel it, I know that God is fighting for me. I may have come out of these battles scarred and wounded, but even in the fights where it looked like I was down for the count, God enabled me to get back up. I may have lost more rounds than I won, but this battle isn't over. And with God, I can keep fighting till the end. And when I don't have the strength to fight, or when the battle isn't mine to fight, God fights for me. And He also fights with me. We're all different, and what's hard for one may be a cakewalk for someone else. These moments in life that seem the hardest are not negated because someone has been through worse. Someone's testimony may be harder. Someone's dark places may be darker. But that doesn't change what was hardest for you or what was darkest for you. Someone else's pain being worse doesn't negate your pain. Someone else's walk being harder doesn't mean that your walk isn't hard. And those bright moments are not any less beautiful because someone else has better. We may see those moments differently now, but that doesn't change how they affected us then. With each new challenge, we grow and we change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And I'm still trying to unlearn bad habits that I learned when I was just trying to survive. But because I didn't quit when things got tough, I'm at a place where I can start to peel away that armored shell that I don't need anymore. I'm not yet who I want to be, but I'm no longer who I used to be. And I know I've said it before, but God is really, truly working all things for my good. They may have not been His perfect will for me, but He has never let me go. Even when I turned away from Him, even when I pushed Him away, He still has held me and turned my heart back to Him and helped me to know Him and to know His faithfulness. No matter what you're going through, no matter where you are at in your personal story, God is there and He's just waiting for you to turn to Him. That may not change the situation. It may not take away the problem. But when we give it to Him, we no longer carry the burden that was never ours to carry. And we learn not to fight the battles that were never ours to fight. God is the one who gives us the victory. God is the one who gives us strength to get back up again. And God is the one who gives us wisdom and discernment to know which battles to fight and when to walk away. In Philippians 4:11-13, Paul says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therefore, to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. And everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me." Whatever part of your story you're on, whether you're on the mountaintop, in the valley, or somewhere in between, we can do all things through Christ. Our circumstances don't change His faithfulness. Our weakness don't change how strong and able He is. God is not limited. Now, yes, we need to get on the same page with Him. Yes, He expects us to walk in obedience. And yes, there are consequences to our choices and the choices of others. When it says, "I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me," we can overcome any and all circumstances through Christ. It may not change the circumstances, but it will change us and how we come through it. And in Christ, we can do all things. Philippians 3:12-14. "Not as though I had already attained, either were already perfected, but I follow after, if that I may apprehend that for which also I am apprehended of Christ Jesus. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before. I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. We may look back and reflect on how God preserved us and how God brought us through, but we don't stay there. We forget those things which are behind and press onto those things which are before. We don't want to live in our failures. We don't want to live in our struggles. They're over. We've been through them. And we don't want to identify ourselves by our weaknesses. Yes, they may be our weaknesses. Yes, they may be our struggles. But they should not be what defines us. We surrender those things to God. We forget those things which are behind, and we push forth to those things which are before us. We keep moving forward. We can't change what happened. We can't undo what happened, but we keep pressing forward. Keep trusting in the Lord to work all these things for our good. Keep pressing toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And as Philippians 1:6 says, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Christ. We can keep fighting. We can keep pushing through. We can praise God through the pain because we know that he, Jesus, who began this good work in us, will keep working in us until he has completed that work. We can push through our weaknesses. We can push through our struggles because we know that Jesus will complete the work that he began. We are not yet perfect, but he is perfecting us. My testimony isn't that I was the biggest or the baddest, but that I was the weakest. And as it says in 2 Corinthians 12:9-10, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. We don't have the victory in this life because we are the strongest. We don't have the victory in this life because we are the smartest. No matter where we are at in our lives, we are where we are because of the grace and mercy of God. And we know that we will have the victory because Jesus has already won the victory for those who are in him. And his grace is sufficient. And because of him, we can glorify in our weakness. Because where we are weak, he is strong. Don't be afraid to admit you're weak. Don't be afraid to admit that you're not strong enough. Because his grace is sufficient. For when I am weak, then I am strong. We can come through whatever we face in this life when we are surrendered to Christ. Because in our weakness, his strength shines through. Our testimony is that God is faithful and that when I am weak, then I am strong. Remember, we have never won a battle on our own. We find strength in weakness. We find hope in believing that God is for us. Who can bring us down? So keep running your race. Don't run away from your weaknesses or your struggles. Give them to God. Trust that he is working all things for your good and that you will receive the victory. What may feel like an endless battle, what may always feel like you just can't ever measure up, if you keep trusting in him, God will bring you through. His grace will be either enough to give you victory in spite of your weakness, where His grace will be enough to give you victory over it, so that what was a struggle for years is suddenly not a struggle anymore. Either way, in Christ, we are victorious, not victims. So find strength in weakness, because if God is for you, who can bring you down? You may feel like the ugly duckling, or the oddball out, or the one always picked last. It may feel like you will never get where you want to go. But know that in Christ, you have the victory, and that if you are following Him, if you are obeying Him, and if you are going where He leads, victory is yours. Even when victory seems like the farthest thing from your reach, keep believing. If God said He will do it, He will do it. You may be going through the darkest season of your life, but keep trusting in Him, because He can bring you out. He can work it for your good. We never know why we go through what we go through, but God works all things for our good. And while I pray that we see the victory and we see the reward while we are here on earth, there are some times that we may not see that victory or reward until we reach eternity. There are some stories we will never understand why we went through them until we are united with Him. But whatever your story, wherever you're at in your story, keep trusting that God is faithful, that He is working all things for your good, and that somewhere down the road, it could be the next minute, the next week, the next month, or the next year, you will be saying, look what the Lord has done. God is faithful. So don't count yourself out. God often uses the weakest. God often uses the last person people would expect. So don't disqualify yourself. If you surrender yourself to the Lord, if you let Him work in you and through you, you will be amazed at what God can do for you, what God can do in you, and what God can do through you. Because greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. Keep trusting in Him and know that He can be trusted to write your story. You may not understand the process. You may not understand the pain. And we may sometimes have to suffer because of people who refuse to do what God has called them to do, or from people who refuse to heal. But God is faithful. Give it to Him. Trust Him to bring you through, to either give you the strength to fight the battle that you're fighting, the strength to leave when you're supposed to leave, or that He will fight the battle for you. Because in Him, we have victory, no matter what we face. Keep trusting Him. Share your story. Don't be afraid to share the low lights of your life, because you never know how your story will reach someone else and help them to turn to God for the victory. Thank you for listening to my story, and I look forward to hearing more of yours. And if you feel led, share your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear what the Lord has done in your life. And you never know whose life your story can touch and change. Like I said, keep trusting in the Lord, keep depending on Him, and know that in His strength, you have the victory. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye.